I think we're good to go ahead and get started. And as people join, they join. And again, this will be recorded um, for those who are here and want to go back to it or to share with others potentially in the near future if they weren't able to join. Before we dive into the program, I'm just going to do a quick introduction to myself and conscious capitalism as well. And so my name is Corey Johnson, and I am the current board president of Conscious Capitalism San Diego. Ruby here is our chapter manager, and Jeff, I see here is part of our board, and there might be a few others joining if they're not already on. And so we thank you so much for being here with us this afternoon. And for those who aren't familiar with conscious capitalism, really it's around a belief that business is good because it creates value, and this value can also be a force for good in the world. It's a way of thinking about capitalism and business that reflects really more where we're at in our human journey, in the state of our world today, and even what we want it to be for our future generations. And so conscious capitalism is really built around four main tenets. And these tenets are higher purpose, which is really the why a company exists, which go beyond just profits. Conscious leaders are those that are more service-oriented, committed to positive change, and really creates opportunities for people to thrive. Conscious culture is as you'd say, culture really is, right? The practices, policies, the ethos in an organization, and conscious cultures are ones that build trust, inclusion, equality, innovation, and really caring, loving environments. And then stakeholder orientation is the fourth tenet, and it's the idea that we create value with and consider the impact of all stakeholders of an organization. So not just shareholders, but also customers, employees, your suppliers, communities, the environment, and investors and shareholders are definitely a part of that mix too. So this isn't obviously an easy thing to do, but we believe it is the right thing to do. And by doing so will actually lead to more successful business. And so Conscious Capitalism San Diego is a local chapter of the Conscious Capitalism movement. And we are really committed to sharing and bringing these tenets and these beliefs to our San Diego community. And also want to invite all of you, to come along with us on this journey and help us do that, because we obviously can't do that alone, and we want to know, how we can be of support to you and your organizations. And so as businesses are one of our stakeholders, obviously employees are a major stakeholder for businesses. We're here today with Eric Johnson, who is from Sachs, Ricketts and Case. Sachs, Ricketts and Case is a woman-owned boutique law firm that focuses on business disputes, commercial litigation, employment counseling, and Eric is part of the San Diego office, and he specializes in advising on a variety of labor and management issues. And so he is here to share some of those insights to current employer laws and policies around the impact of COVID-19, and also maybe touch on some racial and social justice in the workplace. And so I will pass it along to you, Eric, to kind of lead us the rest of the way. So thank you for being here too, Eric.
Okay, great. Thanks so much, Corey. I'm really happy to be here with Conscious Capitalism. I see a lot of familiar faces out there, so it's good to connect with everybody virtually. I did just want to kind of take a moment to put this presentation in context. When I first started talking with Conscious Capitalism about doing it, I think it was either late April or early May. So the big focus was the coronavirus and COVID-19 and everything that was going on as far as getting ready to open up the economy. And so we planned for the presentation and started promoting it. And then lo and behold, in the last 2 weeks, there have been some incredibly huge social changes about Black Lives Matter and racial justice and social justice. And so I just want to acknowledge that I'm aware and that Conscious Capitalism is aware that there are these really momentous changes going on in the world outside of COVID-19, and we're going to touch on them a little bit later in the presentation. But the thought is that we'll go forward with the presentation about the employment laws, and then hopefully have a space to kind of touch on what are some really pressing, important issues going on in the world right now as well. So as far as the regular scheduled presentation, what I want to do is just kind of cut through a lot of the noise that is out there as far as reopening businesses, getting employees back to work, and hopefully provide kind of a clear roadmap of how I would advise clients to get ready to reopen if they haven't yet already, or bring back their employees. I know that my law firm, I'm in an office with just one other person, so I've been coming into the office, but we're being very cautious about reopening our offices in the Bay Area and in Arizona. And that's because we're in the very fortunate position that we can do a lot of our work remotely. But as the courts open up and there is more of a need to have people in the physical office, we're taking a very cautious approach about how we bring people back. And so I think what I'm going to also share is just a lot of the insights that I've learned in working with my firm and how we reopen the office. And then we'll touch on some new case law developments unrelated to COVID-19, and then some new laws that are working their way through the state legislature. And then there's a kind of a quick update about sexual harassment training requirements and some materials the state's providing that we'll touch on. And then we'll transition into off-duty conduct and work, and talk a little bit about these bigger issues of Black Lives Matter and social justice and racial justice. So that's a quick outline of what we're going to do. This is just a picture of me when I had a haircut within the last 3 months, and a quick description of who I am and what I do. The nutshell is that I work with employers, whether it's in litigation or in employment litigation, or in just helping with their day-to-day employment issues. So if you want to get in touch with me after that, I've included my email, I've got my phone, and then I also have my LinkedIn. So I'd love to connect on LinkedIn as well. So feel free to reach out to me if there are any questions after this that I haven't addressed, or if you just want to connect. I try and post on my LinkedIn page sort of relevant topical employment law issues as they come up, and when it's appropriate, some of the funnier things that I see going on with the law. And so, as Corey explained, just the different tenets of conscious capitalism, I'm going to focus on the stakeholder tenet, and that's because what I am finding right now as I talk to my clients, there is a lot of anxiety with your employees. There's a lot of anxiety that employees are feeling about the world in general, and then coming back to work and what their employers are doing to ensure that it is safe to come back to work. And so that's going to be the focus today. And I think one of the themes that you'll keep hearing me returning to is that I think the best thing you can do to alleviate that anxiety is real clear, consistent, and frequent communication with your employees. I think the more that you're communicating what you're doing, that you're aware of the different laws that are ready, I think the more that's going to help soothe some of the anxiety that, as much as possible, that employees are feeling about coming back to work. And at the same time, it's going to, I think, implement some best practices, and it will just also maybe make some changes that need to be made. So that's the goal today, is hopefully you can take some real actionable items to help soothe some of that anxiety that your employees are feeling. So we wanted to start off with a quick poll question. And Ruby, I actually forgot to write down what the question was, but there they are. So if you could click through those and let us know, and that'll maybe help guide some of what we talk about.
Everyone's voted. Here are the results.
Okay, so about 80% employers and 20% employees. That's good to know. That'll help me kind of guide some of the slides I may skip as far as unemployment insurance and state disability insurance. But they're pretty loaded up. So if you're an employee and you want to refer to them, they'll be there for your reference. And then do we have some other questions too, Ruby?
Do you see it?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
And I would just say with the last one, it's if you're part of a business that's helping others reopen. And you may qualify for more than one, but I'll choose one.
One more person.
They might have stepped. Oh, there we go.
There you go.
Okay. So some that are reopening, none that have already reopened, a few that never closed, and then somebody that's helping others and maybe helping others reopen as well. So again, that's good to know. It's interesting that nobody here has already reopened. So I hope that there are some things here that you find useful as you do get ready to reopen. So jumping into the federal, state, and local developments related to COVID-19, I'm going to go through I'm going to start from top to bottom, and I'll start by talking about what the federal government's doing, what the state government's doing, and then what we're seeing at the county level. And what you'll notice is that as far as those different levels, what's coming out at the federal level is just mostly guidance. So best practices, suggestions, checklists, things like that. When you get to the state, there are some very concrete things that I recommend you do and steps that you take. And then at the county level, there are the same things, and there are also very specific things that you have to complete and post and distribute in order to reopen. So starting with the federal level, there are three main sources of guidance. The first is that the White House has put out some guidance, and I think we might be familiar with it. It is pretty thin. There's not a whole lot there, but I do recommend that you click through on that link and see what the guidance is for businesses. The CDC guidance is actually pretty detailed. So I've posted two links there. One that provides guidance for businesses, and then another that specifically talks about office buildings. And I think if you're in the traditional office-based environment, you're looking to open that back up, I would definitely take some time to read both of those links. And you'll find that they're very detailed, but they do have some helpful guidance. There is some interesting guidance that may not be as much of an issue here in San Diego, but some of the controversy with the office guidance, it has to do with public transportation. And one of the things the CDC has said is you should discourage employees from using public transportation, which is all well and good unless you're living in an area like the Bay Area where public transportation really is vital for getting a lot of different people from one place to work. So it's guidance, so you'll have to figure out what you can implement and what you can't, but that is some of the controversy as far as the CDC's guidance. And then the Occupational Safety and Health Administration has, at the federal level, has also provided some guidance. It's, again, a good reference point, and there is some stuff to pay attention to, but I haven't found it to be as impactful for a lot of us that are working in sort of the office-based environment. But again, if you're thinking about reopening and getting ready to do it, I would definitely refer to it just as a best practice. So before we dive into the state level, I did want to kind of circle back with the audience and sort of what I initially led with, which is what are your concerns about going back to the office or to work, or bringing your employees back to the office or to work? And I think we can go ahead and unmute people and oh no, so we'll do that in the chat feature. And I'm going to turn that on. And that's if you want to just type into the chat feature, what are some of your anxieties about bringing people back or going back to work in kind of the traditional office environment or wherever you might work? So that's interesting. Interior offices without window and poor ventilation. And I definitely understand why that's a concern. I think one of the things I think as you go through some of the guidance, there are suggestions about providing office filters, things like that, spacing out offices. But if you're working on a tight budget, and to take a step back, that may actually be a requirement that you might have to provide certain things. But I think as you go through, especially the state's guidance, that does address issues like poor ventilation in interior offices. One thing that I think is also really important is to work with your landlord or your building owner to see what steps they're taking. And another theme that I think you'll hear me coming back to is just really collaboration, whether that's with the people that own your building or operate your building, or the people that work for you. And then Jesus is concerned about what do you do if a person that doesn't want to return to work? And we will talk about that a little bit towards the end of the presentation. And it looked like Amber had kind of a similar concern, and we'll talk about that towards the end, because when somebody doesn't want to return, there's a lot to unpack. And then Tim, legal exposure, and that's, I hate to say it, but that's kind of the $1 million question right now, as far as what employers can do to protect themselves from claims, especially about people getting sick at work. And one of the important things to be aware of is that Gavin Newsom did sign an executive order saying that there's a rebuttable presumption that if somebody is working and they get sick, that for workers' comp purposes, they're going to assume that the person got sick at work. So that's a conversation you'll want to have with your workers' comp carrier. The shared space, Amy's concerns are about shared space and cubicles, and that's very much covered in guidance that's put out by the state. So there's a lot of directives about what to do, especially either minimizing the use of common areas like kitchens or having regular disinfecting. But my experience has been my thought is that if you work your way, especially through the state's guidance, you're going to have some real good actionable items to address concerns about shared space and cubicles and keeping those as clean as possible. And then Jesus will also talk about people that want to work from home. And I know you and I have discussed that. Not commuting every day. I feel you there. I think that one of the best things has been not having that commute. And it just takes so much time out of our days, out of my days. And I think, unfortunately, not wanting to commute is not a valid reason to not want to go back to work. But again, a theme I'll keep returning to is that this is a good time. I hear some legal commentators use the word grace as far as dealing with their employees. And I think that's a really good way, a good philosophy to have, is just use grace when discussing employee concerns about returning to work. And I think this is a time for a little bit more flexibility where you can have it. And then just a few more comments, not willing to return and suing if they come back to work. Liability if somebody gets COVID while working in the office, even if they didn't get it from a coworker. And I think one of the biggest changes for those last two just has to do with the fact that it looks like it's going to be a workers' compensation issue if somebody does get sick at work. So just in my experience, that can kind of cut both ways, is that if it does become a workers' comp issue, it might almost be good because there's a little bit, the workers' comp process is very cut and dry, and it's, with all due respect to my colleagues that do workers' comp, it's pretty formulaic. So if you're not in state courts because or federal courts because somebody got sick, that might also be better because you're not dealing with exposure to a runaway jury verdict. But that's not to say that people won't try and file lawsuits in state or federal court because they might have gotten sick at work. And then just a few more comments. Somebody wanted to know about what happens if somebody dies from COVID-19. And that implicates, if they got sick at work, it definitely implicates workers' comp. And then there's also going to be some reporting requirements for OSHA that we'll touch on as well. So it's really interesting to see some of the common themes, which is that people are anxious about kind of the exposure liability if people get sick, and also kind of recalcitrant employees. And we'll definitely touch on those things, including the not wanting to return to work because they're making more money. And I think the real quick response to that is that there's the balance that you can only collect unemployment if you have if there's no work available. But the moment you're offered a job, I think technically you don't qualify for that. So as an employer, that puts you in a situation where you may have to report that work is available to the employee. But that's another concern that I know is out there, is that there are a lot of people that can make a little bit more on unemployment than if they go back to the office. And it's one of the challenges that employers are facing. So all really interesting, good questions or good topics. And so hopefully we touch on them and answer some of your questions. So going back to the presentation, let me take a quick sip of water. So really the first layer at the state that's important to pay attention to is Cal OSHA. And it has published general guidelines on protecting workers from COVID-19. And I know it says interim, which makes it seem temporary or suggested, but I think right now this is probably one of the more important documents in place to read. And the first action item that every employer should do is update your illness and injury prevention program. And if you're an employer with employees that report to an office and you don't have an illness and injury prevention program, you're supposed to. It's required by law. If you have one, it's time to update it. And what you have to do is talk about the infection control measures that you're going to implement, as far as face covers, encouraging employees to telework, physical distancing, and establishing procedures to routinely clean and disinfect sort of the commonly touched objects and surfaces that are in an office. And as far as illness and injury prevention programs, if you don't have one, there's a really easy template that you can use through the state. If you have one, I would read through these interim general guidelines and just plug in where it says what it says you're supposed to have in there. And I think what you'll find is it's pretty user-friendly and easy as far as understanding what you need to put into your illness and injury prevention program. But like I said, if you don't have it, you should definitely have it. And if you don't have one, this is a good opportunity to get one in place and then have it up to date so that it's addressing the requirements that Cal OSHA has put into place. So the next layer at the state level is the resilience roadmap. And essentially what that is it's a website that the state has put together that has a lot of information for businesses, for counties, for employees and employers. And if you follow that link and go to the guidance for facilities, there sort of across all industries, there are some very definite requirements that you have to do. And these are the 5 bullet points. And what you have to do is you have to perform a detailed risk assessment and implement a site-specific protection plan. Really I think one of the most important things is training employees on how to limit the spread of COVID-19. And if you go through the OSHA guidance and then some of the other guidance we'll talk about, there are some very specific topics that you do have to touch on as far as employee training. And what's so important about that is that through the training, you're communicating to your employees that it gives you an opportunity to communicate that you're aware of their anxieties, that you're aware that there are some very definite requirements that the state has imposed, and that you're taking them seriously and you're going through them, you're executing on these action items. So I would definitely pay attention to what you're supposed to train employees on, and it is pretty clearly spelled out both by OSHA and by the state. And the requirements are a little bit broader than what we have time to go into, the specific requirements, but a lot of it does kind of boil down to just describing what COVID-19 symptoms are, what the symptoms look like, how it's spread, how infected people can spread it, using face coverings, and then just kind of general cough and sneeze etiquette, cleanliness, washing hands, how to properly do it, and then just guidelines for cleaning offices and shared common spaces. So that's what the training should cover. And then the facilities, the state says that you have to implement individual control measures and screenings, and the guidance really spells out what that is. Implementing disinfecting protocols, and then also physical distancing guidelines. And I think one of the things that it's pretty dry, but for somebody like me that kind of geeks out on all this guidance, what I've noticed is that there is a difference between cleaning something and disinfecting it. So cleaning it is cleaning it with soap and water, something like that. And then disinfecting is actually using something like sanitizing wipes. So start to think of them as 2 different things. And I think that's also an opportunity to engage with the people that handle your janitorial work or your facilities. Just ask them what they're doing as far as cleaning and disinfecting, and see if they can provide some explanation about how they're doing those things differently. Because my understanding based on the different guidance is that they are 2 different things that should be done differently. So the next layer is going from kind of those general recommendations and requirements for all industries. The next thing you should do before you reopen is consult the state's guidance for your industry sector. And if you go to that link, and as you scroll down, you'll see that there are menu items that can expand for different industries. And I want to say there's not a few dozen, but there's over a dozen. And as you start to hear about the state says that this industry can open up, what's going on is that this is adding guidance for those industries. And what you should do is, once you get the green light at the county level to open up, is consult that guidance. So there is no guidance for your sector, and you're not allowed to reopen. And one of the situations is that sometimes there is guidance for your sector, but ultimately it's the county officials that are making decisions about what sectors can open. So just be forewarned about that because you may hear that a certain industry is open or a sector is open. So for instance, there's been a lot of talk that the County of San Diego is reopening community pools, and that is allowed, is not allowed until, and that's based on the state allowing pools to open. But that's not going to happen until June 12th, which is when the county has said that those pools can reopen. And so after you consult that guidance, another action item to do is to consult. There's checklists that the states have published for sectors. And it's really important, not important, it's mandatory to complete those checklists for your business or for your company. So read through it, implement it, post it, and distribute as required. And it does tie a lot to the guidance for sectors and for also what we discussed in the previous slide, which was the, I went a little too far back, which was the resilience roadmap. So I think if you follow that checklist for your sector, you're going to be pretty well in compliance with what the state has required you to do. So I think that checklist is probably one of the most important documents to find and read and understand and implement. So those are the state requirements. Before we go into the county requirements, just a real quick chat about if there's anybody located outside the county of San Diego. And if you are, let us know where. Okay, so we've got somebody in LA, we've got somebody in Orange County. And so, so far, just people, just a couple responses outside of San Diego. And then Jesus, to your question about which sector you're in, it does spell out it's got different ones as far as agricultural, I think I want to say contracting, and then there are office-based businesses. So if you don't quite fit into any of those, I think for a lot of companies that are sort of the traditional white collar in an office, you'll want to refer to the guidance for office-based businesses. So if you're in Los Angeles, you're going to have to pay attention to what's going on with the City of Los Angeles health orders and the County of Los Angeles health orders. And they do overlap a lot, but depending on where you are in LA, the City of LA has its own health orders. The City of Long Beach is doing its own thing. The City of Pasadena is doing its own thing. And then you also have the county order to pay attention to. So if you have any specific questions about that, we can talk about it offline. But LA it's a more complex area to work in because you have cities that are handling their own health orders, and then you also have the county, and they are doing a pretty good job of working together on it, but they don't always sync. The other issue in LA is that there are certain ordinances about right to return for employees and right of recall. So if you're bringing employees back and you're in certain industries, then there are ordinances to pay attention to. And Orange County is kind of an interesting one in that for a while, it was taking a kind of hands-off approach. Well, it had health orders, and that scared a lot of people. And then it took a hands-off approach as the state was taking, was implementing more guidance. But I checked it most recently, Orange County does have some specific guidance to refer to. A lot of it defers to the state. But again, if you need really, what I found the best way to find that guidance is to Google something like Orange County Health Order or Orange County COVID-19 Health Order. And that'll take you hopefully to the website where you can find the guidance. But there are some specific requirements in there from the last time I checked about what you should do in Orange County. And so the reason why I wanted to ask about those counties is that I'm going to focus on San Diego County's most recent health order and how to comply, those of us who are here in San Diego, how you comply with that. So, like I said, the state puts out guidance and specific instructions to counties, but you really can't open until you get the green light from from the county at the county level. And so here in San Diego, the reopening is controlled by the County of San Diego's Health and Human Services health orders. And those are updated frequently. So I had purposely held off on doing this slide. I was thinking I'd do it yesterday. I'm glad I didn't, because they published one last night that went into effect at midnight this morning and is now in effect. So it just, how I found it works is that maybe you'll hear on the news that, oh, the state of California says this is going to reopen. And then you wait, not usually a day or two, and then you start to hear more about the developments at the county level. And so I'll wait to hear what's going on at the state level. And then once I do, I'll start monitoring the local press. You can also sign up for alerts through the County of San Diego. And after the state says what it's going to let reopen, a couple of days later, you usually get a new health order from the County of San Diego. And so the most recent one that's in effect now really draws a distinction between essential businesses and reopened businesses. And any businesses that are outside of those categories are what they call non-essential businesses. They can only open if you can provide services from home without contact to the public. The list of non-essential businesses is getting smaller and smaller, and that's because a lot of stuff is being allowed to open. But if you are an essential business, I think by now you probably already know, because you've been open as an essential business since the pandemic started. If you have any questions about that, whether or not you're an essential business, you'd want to refer to the state guidance or to the county health order, and it does spell out exactly what an essential business is by referring to the state's list. So it's those essential infrastructure, critical infrastructure. So if you are an essential business, then what you're required to do is, and you do have the public entering your office, you're required to prepare, implement, post, and distribute a social distancing and sanitation protocol, which you can get through that link. I like that document for a lot of the same reasons that I really like the state's checklist, in that it gives you some very clear action items of things that you can do to safely open a business or safely run a business. So if you have an essential business and you haven't opened that, you haven't gone through the social distancing and sanitation protocol, definitely download it, complete it, and distribute it, and you'll be well on your way to having a pretty safe, under the circumstances, office environment. So if you're not a reopened business, if you're not an essential business, then you are considered a quote-unquote reopened business, and that means that you have been allowed to reopen by the state and by the county's health orders. And so if you fall into that category, you have to prepare, implement, post, and distribute a similar document called a safe reopening plan. And you can access that document there. And again, I like it because it gives you a clear roadmap, in addition to the state's guidance and the state's checklist, about how to safely open up how to safely reopen your business. If there is anybody with restaurants, bars, wineries, or breweries, there is a separate safe reopening plan that you would have to complete. So just be aware of that. And the safe reopening plan does refer to mandatory measures from the state's guidance. So if you're doing the state checklist and implementing the state's guidance, that's also going to help you with the county's reopening plans as well. And again, just another point that businesses can open when a state has posted guidance, and then when the county public health officer has posted an acknowledgement of the reopened status, and then after you've complied with the requirements in the health order. So again, that progression is the state will say what can reopen, the county will allow it to happen, and then you take the steps to make sure it's done safely. And there is no recertification, it's not something you do have to get approved at the county level. I don't want to say it's an honor system, because if you don't do it, I think you're setting yourself up for some problems. But like I said, it's not something that's being enforced, but you should do it just to make sure that you're operating a safe workplace. So just another point to note is that both essential businesses and reopened businesses have to require face coverings. Employees and contractors have to have face coverings and wear them if the public if you're interacting with the public, or if you can't socially distance employees from each other. So I'm in one office and my colleague is in another office, and we're not required to wear the face masks. But if you have two people that are sitting very close to each other, and I would say even I would err on the side of caution if you have cubicles, the face mask would be required. Then it also says that you're required to conduct symptom screening of employees and prohibit employees with a temperature of 100 degrees or more from entering the workplace. That's a little bit different from earlier health orders, which were actually requiring employers to take the temperature. And I'm not sure about the change. It's that the temperature taking and the symptom check is a whole presentation unto itself. So if you do have questions about that, I would say read some of the guidance that's out there. If you do have some questions after that, let me know or we can chat about it. But taking employee temperature and symptom checks raises a lot of issues as far as privacy, wage and hour concerns, compliance. So there's a lot to unpack there. So just as a lot of people indicated, during some of the anxiety they're feeling, it has to do with employees that don't want to return to work, or maybe you don't personally want to return to work. And my guidance there is to take a moment to really have some clear person-to-person communication with your employee. And the reason why is you want to understand what it is that is keeping the employee from coming back to work. If it's general anxiety, I think that's a good opportunity to explain what you're doing and how you're doing that to provide a safe environment. If it's because it's a childcare issue, that's going to trigger some potential leave of absence obligations that we'll talk about in the next slide. If it's because somebody feels that they're vulnerable and a part of a vulnerable population, that's a discussion you'll want to have as far as whether there's a disability you have to accommodate. And it could be that one of those accommodations is allowing remote work. If I'm not sure you're going to have an employee, or if you are an employee, it might be hard to have the frank discussion that, well, I'm frankly doing a little bit better on unemployment than I would be if I was back at work. But again, that is something you may have to touch on and deal with and figure out the best way as far as your company culture to handle. So I think the takeaway from that is take each issue with employees on an individual basis and use it as an opportunity to understand that anxiety and figure out the best way to work collaboratively with your employee or with your employer so that you can bring them back to work or come back to work. And so I'm not going to go into the unemployment because we don't have as much time. But that is there if you're an employee and you have some questions about, or you're an employer, you have some questions about the unemployment programs or the disability insurance, then you can refer to that. I did want to just briefly touch on this Families First Coronavirus Response Act was one of the first laws that was passed when this all happened. And what it allows is employees to take leaves of absence either because they have gotten sick with COVID-19, they are taking care of others who are sick with it or because they have childcare issues. And so just the really high level overview, I think a lot of us might be familiar with it, that if an employee qualifies, they can get 2 weeks of paid sick leave they can get 2 weeks of paid sick leave at a certain rate, and then another 10 weeks of emergency family and medical leave that's paid at a certain rate. And these are going to be in effect until the end of the year. It's really important if you haven't had to administer a leave under the Family Medical Leave Act or the California Family Rights Act, it's really important to be deliberate and cautious as you implement these leaves. If this is your first time dealing with it, it's because you want to get the right documentation so that you can claim the tax credit. You also want to make sure that you're employing employees at the right regular rate of pay, which is different from their base hourly rate. So again, there are a lot of great resources on the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. The United States Department of Labor has 90 some odd frequently asked questions about how you implement them. But if you are in the position that you're just starting to implement these leaves, I would really do it deliberately and cautiously because they're complex. Another issue to pay attention to is that schools are closing. I know one of my daughter's last days was last Friday. The other is finishing up this Friday. But a lot of our summer camps have closed. There are a lot that are going to be open. So remember that just because the schools are closed doesn't prevent an employee from qualifying for leave under the Families First Coronavirus Act if there is a childcare issue. So I just want to put that on people's radars. And then the big question in our household is what the 2020 to 2021 school year is going to look like. So depending, it could be that we're still dealing with employees that need these leaves of absence for childcare. So we're running short on time. I'm going to skip through the questions and just kind of quickly go through the court decisions so that we do leave enough time to talk about the issues with Black Lives Matter and racial and social justice. So one quick case that came down just recently has to do with unlimited vacation plans. And it's a really popular benefit that a lot of employers have implemented. And there was a question about whether or not vacation under an unlimited plan needs to be paid out at the end of employment. And that was raised in this McPherson case. And the long and short of it is that no, you don't. But really what you need to do is if you have an unlimited vacation plan, that policy should be spelled out in writing and consistently implemented. What you don't want to have is an official vacation policy for certain employees and then an unwritten, unofficial employment vacation policy for other employees, because that could result in you having to pay out vacation at the end of employment. So if you want to learn a little bit more about that case and the facts, then those slides are there for your reference. We're going to be publishing this presentation when it's all done. And you can refer to this slide. There's some really good guidance from the court that decided the McPherson case about how to properly implement an unlimited vacation policy. The Herrera versus Zumiez case, that has to do with reporting time pay. So the takeaway there is if you have employees that work shifts and you're requiring them to call in to see if they have to work that day, that's going to trigger your obligations for reporting time pay, which is it's compensation that you have to provide to employees if they report for work but aren't provided with a full day of work. And so the Herrera case was a federal case that essentially adopted a decision in the state, which was Ward versus Tilley's. So the takeaway there is even if employees aren't physically reporting to work to see if they have to work that day, if you are requiring them to come in to see if they're going to pick up a shift or if they do have to work, then that triggers your obligation for reporting time pay. So some other quick blurbs about notable cases. The Frelkin versus Apple case, it has to do with exit searches. So employee time spent in exit searches it's going to be time you have to pay them for. The Brome versus the Highway Patrol case, the point I want to make there is that if you hear employees using anything that you would characterize as locker room talk at the office, that needs to be nipped in the bud and dealt with, because it just has no place in the workplace. And if there is a lawsuit, locker room talk, or it being locker room talk, is not going to be a defense. Technolite, that case essentially says that your employees do have a duty of loyalty to you while they're working for you, so you can prevent them from competing against you while they are your employee. Nori versus Countrywide, if you are familiar with California's wage and hour laws, there's specific information that you have to put on a pay stub. One of them being the name of the legal entity that is the employer. And what that Nori case said is that you can't use a fictitious name. The point there is just make sure that you have the required information on pay stubs, because it's really low-hanging fruit for plaintiffs' attorneys. And don't use a DBA. Make sure that you're using the name for the legal entity that's the employer. There hasn't been a whole lot of pending legislation, and that's because the legislature was impacted by COVID-19. But here are some laws that are working their way through. I think what we are seeing is a trend toward just providing more leave to employees that are impacted by COVID-19, more job protected leave. So those are some of that's AB 3216 that's working its way through. But separate and apart from that is really, I see a trend toward more job protected leave, especially for working parents. So that's the general trend at the state level. I've got some quick descriptions there for you to refer to if you do want to see laws that are working their way through. But we'll know a lot more in September and October when the legislature starts passing laws and they go to the governor's desk for signature. So this is quick blurb about sexual harassment training. The Department of Fair Employment and Housing has put on online courses. They said they were going to do this at the new year, but those courses are now online. It's right now they only have one of two courses that they're going to put online. And if you don't know, if you have 4 or more employees, you're required to provide non-supervisory employees with sexual harassment training before January 1st, 2021. So pay attention to that change in the law. There was a grace period, but now that the DFEH is putting the materials online, you're going to have to implement those requirements, the training requirements. So I had prepared kind of a discussion about off-duty requirement and what's going on with the world. But I think what I'm going to just do is jump to our closing discussion so that we have some time for it. And really the prompt that I want to put out there for discussion is, what conversations are you having with stakeholders, or is your employer having with you about Black Lives Matter, racial justice, and social justice? And just what I'm seeing a lot of is, I know on my LinkedIn feed, a lot of colleagues are really paying attention to statements that their employers are putting out. I can tell a lot of them appreciate when statements are put out. And conversely, I've seen some organizations get really slammed, especially on social media, when they aren't putting out statements. So with that broader discussion, I think, Ruby, we're going to open it up to a chat. And instead of the sort of the typing chat feature, we wanted to put it up to kind of a verbal discussion. But that's where we wanted to end.
And I'd just like to make a comment too. Like this, obviously, we should create more space and time for this too. So if there is, a want or time for that, maybe, I don't know, Eric, if we invite you back for another kind of session that specifically focuses on something like this, and noting when you said at the beginning, when we started planning this presentation, it was over a month or so ago. And so, this is even more current and relevant to today as well. So just want to acknowledge that as well.
Yeah, and thank you. And I think it would also be an interesting discussion about the off-duty conduct and how that is impacting employer decisions and employee decisions. But I guess I'd be kind of curious to hear from people in the audience, just what they are putting out there, how they're planning to put it out there, discussions they're having, what they're hoping to see. Then I'd just be curious to hear more.
Jesus made a comment if you see that.
I did. Thanks, Jesus. Good. So Jesus, just for those of you who don't know, he is a client of mine that operates a housing at SDSU for low income, and Jesus, I hope I don't butcher anything, but it's for low income and first generation students at SDSU. So they provide housing for them. And so what he's doing is they've issued statements. They're sponsoring a forum for students. They're going to have a staff meeting dedicated to see how people are coping. I think that's a really good idea. And I'm glad to hear that you guys were doing it, because I know the last time we talked, there were some questions about what to do, and you were feeling some pressure to do it. Any other comments or actions?
Eric, I'll just say that if anybody wasn't, there's a recording. Claude Jones did a workshop last night, who runs the San Diego Tech Hub, that was insanely powerful he's a highly intelligent gentleman who painted the whole picture of history of, he did some research. He runs Walmart Labs up in Carlsbad, and he's represented himself incredibly well, very well spoken, and it was a very powerful hour presentation. Then it was like an hour and 15 minutes of conversation amongst the participants. That's all been recorded and up online. But I think just having open forums where people can share is really critical, and that people have to get out. Was that one of the
common themes that kind of emerged from the discussion after the presentation?
Well, the conversation was, how do we as white, those that were raised in white privilege, how do we act? I mean, there was a really interesting conversation. I have some friends that are very vocal around this, and they're like, you don't understand what white privilege really is unless you've grown up as a Black person or as a minority in this country. And I get it. And the question is, so what do we do differently? And it's like, just identify it and to talk about it. And at Aspire, in our meetings, we've had open conversations amongst members about it. And how do we do it? And I think it all starts with conversation. Okay.
And are there any other things that are coming out of those conversations as far as what people can do?
Standing up for what's right, I think, is a big part. But I think the issue, my personal opinion, is the issue starts much younger than what we're talking about. Yeah. And we need to do something about our inner cities and our school systems and the ecosystems where these people, I'm saying these people, it is anything that has to do with economic disadvantage. It has nothing to do with color of skin, has nothing to do with, but it's been focused on those of skin color because that's how our society has evolved over 400 years, however many years. And we can say a lot of things that will anger people without intention, because we're trying to figure out how to dance around this topic while being conscious and being caring and being articulate when you can say something that is a landmine that you don't even know is a landmine. I mean, that's part of the challenge with this, is that you can have the best intentions, but how do you deal with that? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I mean, people take things however they're going to take them, and you can't imagine when you're saying things with the best intention that somebody's going to go sideways because of what you said. And I think this is going to be I'm glad we're a two-person office with without a lot of employee drama, because I think there's going to be a lot of challenges around this.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's really good to know. Thanks a lot for sharing, Larry. I don't know if there was anybody else that wanted to comment.
Yeah, I'd like to comment. I think the fact that we have the amount of silence that we have when you ask that question points to Larry's question. Everybody is just afraid of stepping on landmines. And we've gotten to a point where we can't have dialogue. And then I listened to somebody who is the author of a book called White Guilt. I think his guy's name is Steele, who's part of the Hoover Foundation in Stanford. And he talked about the fact that this particular, when the riots were there for civil rights, everybody knew exactly what people wanted. They knew exactly why they were doing what they're doing. And right now, I don't think anybody knows that, because it's contaminated by people who are legitimately protesting and legitimately protesting the unnecessary violence and certainly the death of George Floyd, which I think at that moment, if all you happened was protest and peaceful protest, I think the nation was aligned around that was unjustified and really has to be remedied going forward. But it's now contaminated with looting and contaminated with insurrection in a certain way, like Antifa and things like that. So what's the aim right now? So I think that's what's missing, and we're not having leadership really outlining a reform plan at any level, whether it's state level or federal level, that anybody, if they are, nobody's listening to it or it's not being communicated. So it's a mess at this point in time, and I think there's a big gap in leadership in all sectors, at all levels, whether you're white or black or brown, it doesn't matter. What we need right now is leadership, and that's my opinion on it. And I don't know what to do, but I know that it's dangerous to speak up, and because you don't know what to say anymore, you don't know what's right anymore. You don't know what the how people are going to interpret that, and then be offended, right? And to me, my big word, what I'm offended about, the only thing I'm offended about is the word offended, because that's been a very popular word, not just recently, but over the last 5 years. So I'm offended by this, I'm offended by that. So how do you have dialogue with that? That's my comment.
Well, I mean, that wraps up, I think, my portion of the presentation. Thank you everybody for sharing and for asking questions. I'm going to turn it over to Corey. I don't know, Corey, if there's anything else we want to do to wrap up, but thank you everybody for attending. It's been a real pleasure to be with you, and hopefully I'll see you at future events soon.
Thank you, Eric. Yeah, I just, I hear that the need for open dialogue and for conversations, is really a place to start, as well as a place of listening to others from all different perspectives and their experiences. And so, I don't know exactly what that looks like, but for those who have shared or those who maybe haven't, but have some thoughts or just questions, as Conscious Capitalism San Diego chapter, we would love to hear from you and listen to you on maybe what this looks like, or how we can even just start kind of more of that open dialogue and conversation with each other, and what that really even means, for us and for our businesses, and how that functions there too. So I appreciate you sharing, and appreciate you, Eric, for all the information you shared with us today. And again, this will be recorded and information, and and we too just want to keep those lines of communication open. So please do not hesitate to connect with us, and we'll be in touch with you all as well. And thank you for going over and for taking some time with us this afternoon, and hope to see you around. All right. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.